Thank you for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, we have two major stories out of Israel. As a member of the war cabinet, Benny Gantz resigns while the war is waging on against Hamas. That move coming as Israel rescues 4 hostages from Gaza who were taken captive October 7th. We're going to bring you the story from Jerusalem. Big week for Southern Baptists holding their annual convention, taking on key issues like how they handle sex abuse, the role of women in ministry, and more. Major shift in Europe. Voters shake up the political establishment with major gains for conservative candidates in the European Parliament and leading to the collapse of the French government. And speaking of elections, we're going to look at why suburban women could be such a key factor in this year's presidential race right here in the U.S. All those stories and more are ahead today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with those two big stories out of Israel, a resignation and a daring rescue. Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, has announced his decision to leave the government and call for new elections. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the announcement followed one of the most daring hostage rescues in Israel's history.
As Israelis celebrate the daring rescue of 4 hostages held in Gaza, Benjamin Netanyahu's government faces new challenges. One day after the raid, Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, announced his resignation. He called for the government to accept the Biden peace plan and for new elections.
In order to ensure a real victory, it is fitting that in the fall of the year of the disaster, we go to elections, which will result in the establishment of a government that will win faith and overcome the challenges.
Posting on X, Netanyahu asked Gantz to stay. This is the time for unity and not division. We must remain united within ourselves in the face of the great tasks before us. I call on Benny Gantz, do not leave the emergency government. Don't give up on unity. Many believe elections are dangerous with Israel fighting a multi-front war. Alex Trayman tells CBN News, despite Gantz's departure, Netanyahu's 64-seat coalition is secure, and Israelis want unity as they face multiple enemies.
Israelis are fighting in Gaza, left and right, alongside each other, supporters of the prime minister, opponents of the prime minister, and they would have hoped that in this time of intense security crisis that the politicians would do the same.
Meanwhile, Israelis are relishing the joy of Saturday's rescue. In an operation months in the planning, IDF Special Forces Saturday rescued 4 hostages kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. The family reunions brought a joy and glimmer of hope Israelis rarely experienced in the past 8 months. Netanyahu met with the freed hostages and their families, some calling it the biggest rescue in Israel's history since the Entebbe raid in 1976. Hamas claims more than 270 civilians died in the raid, but Israel says the number is less than 100. As the special forces brought the hostages to freedom, they sent the message, the diamonds are on their way home.
Continue our coverage now with Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem. So, Chris, does the resignation of Benny Gantz affect the stability of Israel's government?
Well, not right now, Ephraim. The coalition still has 64 seats. Unless one of those coalition partners of those 64 leave, it remains to be stable. Now, Gantz joined after October 7th to form a unity government, but he's not needed to keep the government together. It could impact the perception of the government in the eyes of the quote-unquote international community, and it also changes the complexion of the war cabinet. 2 of the 5 members are gone. That would be Gantz and also a man named Gadi Eisenkot. Gantz was a voting member, and Eisenkot was an observer. So that could change a little bit of the dynamic of the war cabinet. But the government can still function without a war cabinet, and the security cabinet can serve as what has been the war cabinet.
What would new elections at this time mean for Israel?
Well, on the one hand, they could give a clear mandate to lead Israel during this crisis. But according to recent polls, Ephraim, it would likely lead to more political paralysis, with no one party with a clear mandate to form a government, and that's what Israel had experienced for a couple of years before the last election when this current government was elected. And if elections did take place, the current government would be a caretaker government with limited authority. So given the peril that Israel's facing right now, especially with an anticipated war with Hezbollah, it would seem that going to elections right now would put Israel in a very precarious situation.
Let's turn now to the other big story coming out, the rescue of the 4 hostages. How important was this?
Well, it's a huge morale boost and encouragement. You saw the pictures there in our story, people dancing in the streets, celebrating. There's been so much bad news for so long. People were celebrating on the beaches, and as we saw in the streets. You had actually videos of Israelis celebrating in other countries. And I would say that Israel is a small country, as they say, but it's a big family. So for many, this is just like family members coming home. The plight of the hostages ever since October 7th has been an emotional trauma for the country. If you go around here, you're going to see posters and banners of those hostages all over the country. So this was just an outpouring of joy and jubilation that Israelis, for the first time in a while, could really celebrate that their family members came home. And you know that last line there, that was the code word for they had gotten all the hostages. The diamonds are on their way home.
I can imagine that was an intense rescue. What more can you tell us about the operation itself?
Well, Ephraim, was also victory for Israel's special forces. A tremendously complicated and daring raid. The planning had actually been in place for months. Some of those special forces had come in disguised as refugees from Rafah, looking for a place to rent. So they were able to get inside to this community. There were 2 locations of the hostages. There were 3 in one location. Noah Argamani is the other hostage. She was in another location. She's really well known because of all the hostages. She was seen on video as she was being kidnapped and taken by motor scooter from the Nova Music Festival into Gaza. And also the operation, they had to coordinate to hit both places at literally the same moment. So once the raid began, they got surrounded by hundreds of Palestinians with weapons and RPGs. They actually needed air cover to escape. And as we said in the report, some people are comparing this to what happened in Entebbe in 1976. That's when more than 100 Israelis and other nationalities were kidnapped as well. But they were rescued by an Israeli raid. And just as an addendum to that, Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, Yonatan, was the only one killed in that raid.
Secretary of State Blinken is on his way to Israel and Egypt to talk more about a hostage deal. How do Israelis feel about the Biden administration's relationship with Israel?
Well, many see at the very beginning of the war as the Biden administration, really standing with Israel. But someone said it's sort of like a sliding curve. Many see the Biden administration is now trying to undermine the government. Statements by the president, by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And for some people, they perceive Gantz as sort of a puppet by the Biden administration. For example, he went to the U.S. without Netanyahu's approval, met with senior members of the Biden administration, and just is seen as one of the people here trying to overthrow, undermine the government. He's meeting with Blinken today, even though he's not a member of the opposition. And also, finally, the Biden administration wants a 2-state solution, but the majority of Israelis do not.
All right, Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem, thanks as always for your insights. Stay safe and know that we back here are praying for you and our staff there in Israel. Coming up, hot topics for Southern Baptists at the annual convention this week, including how they handle sexual abuse and the role of women in ministry, plus major gains for right-wing parties in European elections, shaking up the establishment. We'll have those stories for you when we come back. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. Southern Baptists meet in Indianapolis this week for their annual convention. Key issues likely to get attention include their falling membership, abuse reform, and the role of women in ministry. Charlene Aaron has this story.
This year's theme is One Mind, One Voice, a desire toward unity from Romans chapter 15. It's a timely message as the denomination wrestles with some of the more urgent matters of the day.
Well, Southern Baptists have a strong conviction that pastors of local churches should be men.
A key vote on whether to ban churches with women pastors is expected during the meeting. Nationally syndicated radio host Eric Erickson.
They've considered it before overwhelming support. There's been a pressure campaign, I think, to get some churches to not support it, but I would not be surprised to see them implement it. And frankly, I think it's a good thing if they do, to provide needed clarity on cooperation within the denomination.
Executive Committee President Dr. Jeff Org argues the SBC is not anti-women, although denominational leaders voted to restrict female pastors last year.
Southern Baptists are not saying no to women in ministry or ministry leadership. They're simply saying that we expect men to lead their homes and we expect men to lead our churches.
One very timely move is an anticipated vote on the question of officially opposing in vitro fertilization. The Alabama Supreme Court sparked controversy in February by ruling frozen embryos created during IVF to be children. Brent Leatherwood, president of the SBC Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, recently called for federal safeguards for the unborn. Writing in a letter to U.S. senators, "We urge legislators to develop and implement a system of federal oversight that protects and informs women and ensures embryos are treated with care, even as we oppose the general practice of IVF." Meanwhile, membership continues to decline, with the SBC losing over 1,200 churches in 2022 alone.
Well, it's always concerning when membership numbers go down, but the membership numbers in our denomination are only one barometer of how we're doing. We're seeing actually increases in the number of baptisms, increases in some areas of giving.
Abuse reform will again be on the agenda. A vote on recommendations from the SBC task force, created in 2022 to help protect survivors of sexual abuse, is also expected.
The next big step for Southern Baptist is finding, if you will, a permanent home within our denominational family of entities for sexual abuse prevention and reform, so that we'll have a place for churches to turn that need help with resourcing, with a hotline, with information about prevention and preventive steps they can take.
Despite the challenges, Org remains optimistic about the overall message and direction many take from the convention.
What I hope most of all, is that every one of them leaves more committed to fulfilling the Great Commission of Jesus Christ and reaching more and more people with the gospel and building stronger and stronger churches to carry our movement forward into the next generation.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
As we reported here on NewsWatch Friday, European voters have pushed the European Union Parliament farther to the right, and the strong showing of conservatives in France has triggered the collapse of the French government of Emmanuel Macron. CBN's Dale Hurd is on the story.
It was not as good a showing as some on the right had hoped for, but good enough to bring down the French government and push the European Union farther right. Conservative parties saw major gains in parliamentary seats, handing French President Emmanuel Macron a humiliation, prompting him to call snap legislative elections in a gamble to save his government. In Italy, Premier Giorgia Meloni more than doubled her party's seats in the assembly. And in Germany, despite being hounded by a scandal and negative media coverage, the conservative Alternative for Germany party still rallied enough seats to outgain Chancellor Olaf Scholz's left-wing Social Democrats. This AfD supporter said the future belongs to us. In France, the president of the National Rally Party, Jordan Bardella, told supporters a wind of hope has risen in France, and it's only just begun. Frank Ferretti, one of the intellectual leaders of the European right, told us the election result was predictable because Europeans have been so unhappy with their governments.
They basically feel that the conventional parties have let them down. They want to have their voices heard. They want to be part of the conversation. And they basically want to have parties that speak like they do, rather than the way that the cultural elites speak. And it's as simple as that.
Ferretti called the conservative victory in France a political earthquake.
The second largest country in Europe in economic and political terms has moved to the right, and that will have a very important impact.
And he said France and the Netherlands under Geert Wilders will be a force to move Europe further to the right.
Those two nations, which are quite substantial, can make a huge difference in the dynamic, the political dynamics within Europe.
The Christian Democrats of EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen remain by far the biggest group in Parliament, but the surge by the right will make it much harder for the Assembly to keep pushing unpopular climate and open borders policies. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Still ahead, a look at another election with global implications, the presidential campaign here in the United States, and a key voting bloc that could decide the vote in the race for the White House. Suburban women. We're going to bring you a look at their key issues right after this. From pocketbook issues to the abortion battle, suburban women voters could be a deciding factor in the 2024 election. Both Republicans and Democrats are targeting this vital voting bloc. Chief political analyst David Brody brings us a look at what's ahead.
While presidential election coverage focuses on the words and actions of two men with very different ideologies, political strategists are watching for signs from a much different barometer.
You will have women deciding the vote this election.
Roma Daravi is a former communications official in the Trump White House.
We've seen that Biden's approval rating across the board is plummeting, and it's no different when it comes to women.
And if that shift takes place in the suburbs, it would be an answer to prayer at the Trump campaign. In 2020, he lost that suburban woman voting bloc by a large 13-point margin, 56 to 43%. Polls today, however, show President Joe Biden leading by only 6 points among women in the suburbs. That's not a good sign for Democrats, considering that over the last decade, they've consistently performed strong with suburban women. Just look at the numbers. 2014, they won 47%. That grew 4 points to 51% in the 2016 presidential election. By 2020, they hit a high water mark of 56%. GOP strategist Alice Stewart looks at what could turn the tide.
When you talk to suburban women, and as you do and I do across the country, they're concerned about pocketbook issues. And Joe Biden has a record. The problem for him is that it's broken on key issues that voters are concerned with. Suburban women voters are the ones that buy the groceries and often put gas in the tank. And when those bills are high, they're frustrated. They feel it. They feel it firsthand.
The Biden campaign is working to turn attention in another direction, specifically abortion.
It was Donald Trump who ripped away the rights of freedom of women in America. It'll be all of us who restore those rights for women in America. And when you do that, we'll teach Donald Trump and extreme MAGA Republicans a valuable lesson. Don't mess with the women of America.
It could be a successful tactic. While immigration and the economy are major political problems for Biden, a Wall Street Journal poll shows abortion as the #1 issue by far for suburban women voters in swing states. It comes in at 39%, more than double that of immigration at 16%. And then the economy falls to a mere 7%.
It's almost laughable that the Democrats and Joe Biden have this huge pro-abortion stance when they can't even define what is a woman. How can you be for women when you can't define what a woman is?
Still, the GOP knows this has not been a winning issue for them politically since the end of Roe v. Wade. To that end, Trump has shied away from talk of abortion bans. The political play by Trump very well could be that he thinks he's going to have the pro-life evangelical vote in his corner. So broadening his appeal to attract more voters in November is a good general election template for victory.
There has to be a way to thread that needle in terms of Donald Trump remaining steadfast and pro-life, but to appeal to the independent suburban voters that want to see abortion access.
Another possible key for Trump would be winning over some of those suburban women labeled hold your nose voters.
I think the fear, David, is the choices will come down to Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or the couch.
And that's why, come election night, both campaigns will watch key suburbs in swing states. In the primary, Nikki Haley did much better than Trump with women in those areas, specifically around Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Atlanta.
If Nikki Haley was able to pull in some new voters to the Republican Party, then kudos to her, because at the end of the day, we always knew they would be voting for President Trump come the finish line.
That remains to be seen, but what's certain is that suburban women voters will be key to who occupies the White House next year.
Women are smart. We're out here running the world, and I think we're definitely going to have a say in this upcoming election.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Back with an encouraging word for your week. Stay with us. Time now for your Monday motivation. I leave you with this thought as we begin another week together. God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. And since He is good, I can rest knowing He will work all things together for my good. And in that work, it is God who gets the glory. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to remind you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time as well as online. That is cbnnews.com. Take a moment. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We certainly would love to hear from you. Make this a marvelous Monday. Come back and see us right here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye. God bless.